afternoon, everybody. For some strange reason, it's 2:30 and I'm doing the last slot. It seems like there's still half the day left, but you got that level right? Is that about right? So he said, just talk to yourself while he gets the level right. And that's what I'm going to do for the next 3/4 of an hour anyway, so I might as well. So good. For those of you that don't know me, good afternoon. I'm Andrew Taylor. I'm technical lead here at ASFP. And for those of you that do know me, I'm sorry. You can play, if you've seen this is about the 27th iteration of this talk, because it's evolved over the last 3 years, and so please feel free, if you've seen any of the 26 before, to play Spot the Difference. And there are a few this time round. So we're going to talk a bit about the need for culture change in passive fire protection. We talked a bit this morning with the PFKG slot. We had a conversation towards the end of that, if you were here, where we were talking about whether we needed whether passive fire protection was a separate construction discipline, that there was the need for some sort of thing to represent it. And Will from Tier 1 said yes, and I'm from ASFP said, well, it already exists, it's us. We're going to talk a bit about that. We'll look into go and dive into the regulations and how we're going through the regulations and how the regulations are developing post-Grenfell and what we know and what we might guess, because we don't know it formally, and when we might know it and what's supposed to be happening. Okay? And right at the end we will talk a bit about competence, but only briefly. We still see examples posted on LinkedIn and when we go around sites of stuff that's patently, obviously wrong. Okay? Why? Well, if you look at these first two here, the first two there, you've got plastic pipes, half in, half out a wall. I mean, whoever designed and came up with a design that covers that, you know, that's never something that any testing program is going to be able to do, and it's never something any product is going to be able to deal with. So you end up with my answer to that will be to point to the Tier 1s, point to the principal designer, the principal contractor, and say, can you not, please? Because that's purely a design issue. Far side, we've got some poor installations. Okay, I mean, that was using pink foam for a squirty floor seal, because that load-bearing pink polyurethane foam? I think not. And then the other one is my favourite picture that I always trot out, which is the door reveal filled with those fire-resistant site shoe covers. I mean, where's the tested detail for that? And then the one in the middle is an example of, well, it's got just about everything gone wrong with that particular picture. The specification, that's an external application of an intumescent coating not with an external specification on it, that's basically had no maintenance, and the joint detail where the boarding system comes into it, there's a big hole. So you've got you've got poor design, poor specification, poor installation, and no maintenance. And that's the outcome. Okay. Now, this is in effect, for us here within ASFP world, there's nothing new here. This is stuff that we've been talking about since this report done back in 2003 led by ASFP, by our chairman at the time, a guy by the name of David Sugden, for those of you that are aware of Suggy's reputation, sadly no longer with us. I'm still talking about you. And this was a piece of text from within that report, which you can see recommends foretells of problems and recommends that we need to make steps and strides to improve standards of design and installation and maintenance. And of course, why do we need passive fire protection? What's so important about this? And we've got two examples on the screen here. I'm sure many of you recognise Lacanal House which was 8 lives lost in 2007. Okay, how many of you recognise the middle one? And if you recognise the middle one, have you seen me talk about it before, or do you know what it is?
I've just seen the building.
All right, okay. So the building is?
I don't know the building.
Right, the building name is Cleveland Tower.
It's the 23rd floor fire.
And how many of you heard of the Cleveland Tower fire? Right, there's a reason why you've not heard of the Cleveland Tower fire. It happened a week after Grenfell. There was a fire on the 23rd story of that building. There's the fire, that's the far right hand picture. And the compartmentation worked, the fire was maintained in its compartment of origin, but you can see it was a serious fire. I mean, you know, you can tell it was a proper fire, and yet you've never heard of Cleveland Tower fire because it wasn't a story. Fire brigade went in, they put the fire out, everybody was happy. That's why you've never heard of Cleveland Tower. That's why passive fire protection works. Obviously, everything that we're doing nowadays comes back to a point in time, this point in time. And if you look at our fire regulations always get changed immediately after a major disaster. The vast majority of our reaction to fire stuff dates back to King's Cross. And this is a piece of text from Building a Safer Future. Again, I'm sure you must have seen you've seen pictures of the book if you've not actually read it. And Dame Judith Hackett back then said, construction, you need to change your culture. You need to make sure that it's not just the race to the bottom and best last price. It's not got to be as cheap as possible, and we've not got to be looking to pass the responsibility everywhere in the contractual chain. And so that text comes from this report that she published. And she's made a lot of recommendations, 58 in total, including, and primarily the key things being these gateway steps. I'm going to talk a bit more about what those gateways are and precisely what they mean as we get to a little further on in the presentation. She recommended full plans. She made recommendation of third-party certification of products and installers, which has been a tenet of what ASFP has talked about forever, since we were founded in 1977. And she made recommendations that we all needed to increase our competence. We needed to increase our competence and have a formal way of showing that we'd done that. So there's 2 key pieces of legislation that the government has done on that. One's the Fire Safety Act, which passed into law in April, brings external walls and flat front doors into the scope of the Regulator Reform Fire Safety Order. If I'm allowed to do it, I'd say I'll do my one joke here and say other shapes of front doors, it's only flat front doors, other shapes aren't allowed. There are problems with this, but it's been implemented now. 23rd of January, we had some Fire Safety England regulations went live, and so there's now all sorts of requirements on flat front door inspections and the like. So this is there. We're still working. The industry response group is still working on setting up the competence of the fire risk assessors for this. But we've got lots of that is already in place. The other side of the coin is a thing called the Building Safety Act, which Royal Assent was April last year. We actually got the final text of it in May last year, and that's enabling legislation. So it gives it's enabling legislation for the Dame Judith Hackett recommendations. And it gives the Secretary of State powers to do stuff. So it's not, it's the framework by which stuff is going to change, but it doesn't actually contain all the detail and all the nuts and bolts of what's involved. but that's that. There were a couple of changes that are in there in that Building Safety Act as it's published that were not necessarily following through already on some of the stuff that Dame Judith had asked for. One of the key ones, Building Safety Manager, the text of that was removed. Okay, principal designer, principal contractor remain the same, and they're responsible for the principal designer is the design of the building up to and including what we'll talk about Gateway 2, and principal contractor for delivering it through to Gateway 3. But that's subtly different. PEEPs are not required, personal emergency evacuation plans. And what we now see is that two key developments here. Government's now tasked with producing the secondary legislation. Now, I was hoping there were various bits of this secondary legislation that were due to be published in February. And the idea is that they consult on it. Having consulted on it, they produce secondary legislation, and then we discuss and we agree it, and then it gets published. Okay, some of that we were expecting to see draft stuff out in February, and it hasn't come. But there is a new regulator for primarily for which we'll talk about in a couple of slides. In fact, next slide. And they're now formally live. So there is a new regulator for buildings that's live, and that's under the auspices of HSE, National Building Safety Regulator. Regulators went live as of the start of this month. Okay. Now, they ran a conference towards a building regulator. HSE ran a conference on building regulations last month at the end of March, and their key phrase is, and you might have heard Joe Celia mention it this morning at the PFKG thing, that HSE is doing stuff to not just for high-rise residential buildings, but there is stuff here for all buildings, safety and performance of all buildings, all right, and promoting competence of those working on all buildings. And they use some marketing gurus come up with from shed to shard. Okay, I'm sure whoever you were who came up with that, you probably sat there feeling proud for yourself. But so they do. HSE will be doing stuff from shed to shard, but it's more the shard end of stuff where the gateways are going to come into force. Okay, all right. Right, government when we came out with Building Safety Bill gave us this fantastic timeline. It's all right if you're at the back and you can't read it, don't worry. We'll go into it in a bit more detail in a minute. So we started off here, the bill was introduced, the bill gets royal assent, and then on those bubbles down the middle, it's got some stuff at royal assent plus 12 months, some stuff on royal assent plus 18 months. So we said the bill went live and it got royal assent in April last year. So royal assent plus 2 months, we were going to extend the limitation period of Defective Premises Act. That's already been done. So if it's a residential building, historic residential buildings, Defective Premises Act regulations now goes back 30 years. For new builds being constructed going forwards, DPA is extended from 6 years to 15 years. So there's an awful lot of stuff, and that covers everything. So there's a much greater level of liability on what we build now, and to a certain extent on what's been built in the past. Okay. Beyond that, let's have a look in more detail at that block of stuff that sat there in the middle of royal assent plus 12 months. Okay. So there's a residence panel. All right. Well, HSE's already. This should be going through now. This is April this year. HSE is now live. It's establishing a residence panel. It's redone the regulatory reform. The regulatory reform order's redone. That was the stuff that went live 23rd of January. Okay? It says, the Architects Registration Board, don't ask me, I don't know. The far one says additional powers to the regulation of construction products. Now, as far as I'm aware, we're still waiting for the draft regulations to underpin that one. We're still waiting for that. So that was meant to be, and thankfully, Laura's nodding. So I'm just looking at my OPSS contacts. They're nodding at me. So we're still waiting for those powers to be laid, and we're still waiting for that. That gets us to 12 months. What then comes next is this block of stuff at the period 18 months. This is October this year. Okay? And October this year, it says October this year, the Building Advisory Committee is going to be established. They're already meeting, so big tick for that one. We're ahead of the game on that one, ahead of the curve. Okay? The Industry Competence Committee will be established. There's already an interim committee that's been doing that for the last 2 years, and there's now applications I've invited to join this formal committee. So that's good. Mandatory registration of occupied buildings. The conference was at in March is delivering that. That registration system is open, and if you are responsible for a high risk residential building, you should be registering that now on the HSE's web portal. But you should find out more about that from HSE, because they're pushing that already. But that system is up and running. Gateways 2 and 3 for new builds come into force. Now this is an interesting one, and we're going to talk a bit more about this on the next few slides. But gateways 2 and 3, we haven't seen the secondary legislation for that yet. We're told it's coming. We're told the gateways are coming, and the gateways will be here as of the 1st of October. But as time ticks by, the implementation of that is getting harder and harder to do. Okay, there's lots of other stuff, and you can see at the end there, construction products, lots more new requirements, lots more toughened and strengthened powers for OPSS. That's meant to be at Royal Assembly's 18 months, that's October, but we're still waiting to see what that secondary legislation looks like. So there's still bits and pieces of secondary legislation that we're still waiting for. When they come, there's meant to be a consultation, there's going to be questions asked about how that all works, and then we can get that forwards. So that's when it's meant to be, and what it will be, how we get as we get there, we don't know. We're keeping an eye on it. We can talk about some stuff we've seen before, and so let's have a think about the gateways. We've signposted this is the important part of what Dame Judith was talking, and these gateways are for high risk residential buildings. Okay, so residential buildings with one or more dwellings taller than 18 metres. Okay, now Gateway 1's been live for a while. Gateway 1 is you have to have a conversation with HSE where you say, I'm going to build a building, it's going to be this big, it's going to look like this is where it's going to be, this is how the fire brigade can get there, this is what we're going to do, this is our fire strategy. And it's a conversation at that level at REBA, somewhere between REBA 0 and REBA 1, where we talk about that, and that's outline planning. Okay? It's just and the outline planning. They've been running for a while, and initially over 50%, nearly 2/3 of Gateway 1 submissions were being rejected because there was inadequate access for fire and rescue service. Sometimes over questions about twin stairs. And I'm not going to go into twin stairs and the BS 476 consultation. If you want to hear all about that, Niall's doing that. I think he's doing that tomorrow. Okay? But what we're talking about here is the fact that actually the bigger worry is gateways 2 and 3, which were going to go live, as we said in the previous slide, as of October this year. Gateway 2, a gateway 1 says, I'm going to build this, that's fine. Right, you pass that, away you go. Gateway 2 will say you need to submit a far greater rigour to the plans that when you get to the HSE to get permission to build, permission to construct. Okay? And the worry here with Gateway 2 is that's the implication initially was full plans to HSE before you construct. Whereas a lot of what's happened nowadays is our passive fire protection is done as what's called contractor design portion, or design and build contracts. And with contractor design portion, it's a new word for me, I've not used it before, but the design responsibility goes from the principal designer to someone within the principal contractor. The legal term is novation. And so the design can be novated. So there's a big debate at the Building Safety Regulators Conference saying, well, we still want to novate the design. Well, you can novate the design, but you're going to have to appoint your principal contractor earlier in the piece so that design work can be done before they start building. So I think there is still in construction world some talking and some discussion about how that's all going to unfold and what that's going to look like. But allegedly, that's that. And then Gateway 3, well, of course, Gateway 3 becomes nice and easy because with full plans, Gateway 3, at the end of Gateway 3 says, have you built what you said you were going to build before you get permission to permission to occupy? Okay? And now if you've planned it properly and you've designed it properly, and then you built what you said you were going to build, Gateway 3 should be a doddle. HSE will want to know if you want to make a major change to your design. And I know that some of the discussions about getting from Gateways 2 to Gateway 3 what's going to go in this secondary legislation is about, go on then, what's a major change and what's a minor change? What can you do and advise HSE at the end? And what can't you do? And what do you need to stop and actually let HSE know during the process? Once you've done it, building certificate, and then your building certificate's building safer, and then you've got to keep a safety case running. How do you maintain that building? How do you show that that building is safe for people to occupy? Okay. So, well, I think we've already done that on the previous slide. Gateway 2 point, yeah, final check at Gateway 3, demonstrate what you built was what you planned. One of the key things that sits underneath all this is the golden thread, okay? Or possibly the golden rope, depending upon your point of view and what you think. So we have been consulted, and we did do a consultation in October last year about what was in the golden thread and the extent of information that's needed in that golden thread going forwards, right? So if you're designing a bit, and there is going to be a much greater need going forwards for record keeping to show what you've designed, what you've built is what you've got, okay? And the onus at the moment in time is on the client to collate and submit all this, the building owner, the asset owner, because they're going to need it for the safety case going forwards. They're going to need all this information for the safety case to use that building. They're going to need this information to prove that what they've got is right, and it's also they need to prove that the competence of the people that did what they did to get the building is right. So there's an element of this drives responsibility onto the client, which, are they necessarily the right people to do that, but they're the one person that remains right in the contractual chain that will remain involved in the building. So if Gateway 3 is going to drive an increased level of recording of installed systems, then one of the things that we need is in well-defined inspection, well-defined record keeping, a well-defined record keeping system. And we're going to need to get smarter with digital recording. I think it's no surprise that when you look around the show, there's an awful lot of people on digital recording type kit, showing what they're doing, showing how they're doing it, and there's all sorts of stuff that do that. Here's a picture of a hole, here's a picture of a pipe, here's a picture of a mastic, here's some batch numbers, here's the pipe, collar, sleeve, whatever going on it, here's the label, here's the certification, here's the competence information of the guy that installed it. Job done. Okay, so we're going to need to see an awful lot more of that so that we can see that, and then inspectors post that are going to have to make sure that the telecoms engineer hasn't come round the building since, and next to that lovely fire seal past a Cat5 cable through the wall, precision cutting a hole with a claw hammer. We're also going to get a mandatory occurrence reporting system. We think it's going to be based on what Cross is doing. Cross is starting to look at passive fire, and we think it's going to be something similar to this. What's going to be a reportable occurrence? There's a definition of that, and we'll be reporting occurrences to HSE, and HSE will be learning. So it's adopting a model that's very, very similar to, we already have it in structural world. It's a similar sort of thing to what we see in aircraft and avionics, where we need some better recording, and rather than hiding these things. And if you are interested in this, say Cross is looking at nowadays at fire, structural fire. So if that's of your particular interest, sign up. That's a really interesting newsletter. So we've mentioned this already. Our construction products regulations took the stuff in the Building Safety Act's tucked away at the back. It gives Secretary of State powers to make regulation, but we haven't necessarily seen what those look like. There was an iteration published in October 21, but that's been taken off the government website. We are waiting for our friends from DLUC to give us the next iteration. Now, and coming sooner than we think, but I'll talk about why that is in a couple of slides' time. The Office of Product Safety and Standards set up as a construction products regulator, so we've needed this for a while. We've needed something like this for a while because a lot of this is really complicated. It's too complicated necessarily for trading standards people to deal with, and there's not a lot of case history even in Europe for construction products. For stuff being regulated by trading standards, because it's too hard and too complicated. They've got all sorts of powers to protect you, to rectify problems, to compel manufacturers to remove stuff from the market, and a lot of these powers already exist. It's being run by a group of people for OPSS. They were under BASE, they're now under the Department for Business and Trade, because the energy thing got taken out by Rishi's reshuffle. And they can look at things like misleading marketing claims. What they're not necessarily looking at is design and installation. They're looking but they are looking at stuff to factory what manufacturers are selling, what they say they're selling, and will it do what they say it will. They've got to put out a call for industry experts to help declare with issue resolution, and they're already looking into 6 key product areas, a lot of which has come out of the Grenfell, so fire doors, external wall systems, smoke control systems are in their list, and they're on with those as we speak. Now this is brand new. This is almost hot off the press. Government committed to doing a review of construction products testing, summer 2021. A guy called Paul Morell chaired it, with a QC on board as well to help with that. She's now a KC, of course. And having done that report was meant to come out in about October, November 21. It came out last week. It came out on Thursday. It makes, and I'll be honest, I haven't stopped and counted them. I reckon it makes about 80, 90 recommendations on what we should do with construction product testing. Many of those recommendations fall onto government. One of the interesting ones was that they think as an industry we should look to simplify our understanding of product testing using classification system. Now, the classification system we have in which is at the moment the European classification system, apart from the BS476, there's a little bit of one for reaction to fire and a little bit of one for fire doors, but there isn't one for the rest of passive fire. The interesting thing with that is that there may be a whole host of reasons why it makes sense as a recommendation, but it's really hard to do and it's really complicated to do. And if you want to know about that, either come to Niall's presentation tomorrow or have a look on the ASFP website. Niall and I did a webinar in January about the end of 476. They're still talking about, it talks about bringing product families into a safety critical system. We'll talk about that on the next slide. And it considers, from those of you that saw Tariq's presentation just before this, increasing the AVCP rigor, moving things from System 4 to System 3 to System 2. So increasing the amount of rigor in our conformity assessments, so that there's more tasks for the notified body, more increased sampling, increased testing and assessment by outside companies. And there are some recommendations for industry, and of course there's lots of recommendations in there that, to be honest, one party alone isn't going to be able to solve. And to get to all this, if we want to make this happen, we're going to have to work together, collaboration, which tends me back towards culture change, because we're going to have to talk more to one another and make sure it all works together. I'm sure many of you have seen this this slide before, because I've been using it since about October 2021. 3 strands of construction products, systems, testing, etc., etc. The left box is a general product safety requirement. That's a repurposing of a piece of consumer legislation to cover all construction products. If you're a manufacturer of construction products, can you prove that you're putting a safe product onto the market? The right-hand box is the existing regulatory approach. What's harmonised? What was harmonised in? It's a designated British product standard that you have to do. It's a legal requirement to market if you want to put it onto the market. And it's now, it's been subtly changed because it's now a UK designated UK by Brexit, but it's there. In my world, in passive fire world, that's dampers. And the rest of the stuff that we deal with, fire stopping, intumescence, structural protection, board sprays, cavity barriers, they potentially fall into this black hole in the middle. They need something more than a general product safety requirement, but they're out with the existing regulatory framework, and so we end up with a government to create a thing called safety critical, which will behave like a designated standard with a high level of attestation of quality, and that will be in the middle, and there'll be a series of new product standards needed for that. If we keep talking, there's lots of conversations about competence, and we keep talking about competence going forwards. And again, I think you'd all agree. If you wind the clock back 5 years, people were ignorant to risk in construction, didn't necessarily pay attention to what was going on, and we ignored them. Nowadays, we're more risk averse, and the risk flows downhill down the contractual chain, and manufacturers turn around to me and say, "Oh, it ends up with us, and we've got nowhere to put it." And so there's a lot of stuff. We need to work better together to deliver safer buildings, and look at how we can manage the risks and understand the risks, rather than just looking to make sure that whatever happens, none of that risk ends up with me. It's just a few slides. To be honest, we've already covered this. So, design. When should we involve fire specialists? Well, as soon as you can. And you're going to have to now, because Gateway 2 is going to say, don't wait till you're on site and bring a fire specialist in, because they're going to change all your designs. I use this one as my example. It's a brilliant, whoever did the spatial coordination design on this gets an award. Poor fire stoppers left looking at it thinking, what do I do with that? I've got no standard for it. It's got a smoke control damper that's not in the plane of the wall, in the same opening as all these pipes and cables. From a fire stopping standpoint, it's a nightmare. So we turn around, and that's if you can actually get to it and get into it and sort it out, you know. So spatial coordination looks brilliant, 10 out of 10. Passive fire protection, none out of 10. Can you not? Please, can you don't? So, you know, this is the sort of thing. What do? We work together with a lot of people. We put together a guidance saying, you know, this is how we need to collaborate more, talk earlier, and in greater depth in the design process. Okay? So we said that back then, and it's still true now, and the culture change in fire is going to demand that we do this more and more going forwards. Okay, we did another one with FIS. That QR code, if you're interested, does actually work. Here's a label to put on a firewall. Comes back to stopping my telecoms engineer armed with his precision claw hammer, smashing holes in walls to pass cables through, and then doing nothing about it. There's this sticker on it, says, stop, think about it, this is a firewall. Are you going to breach the fire compartmentation? If you are, what do you need to do? You need to plan, you need to check, you need to record, because Golden Thread will demand that you plan, check, record anything that goes through that fire compartment. Okay. So we are going to have to collaborate a lot more. No one has all the answers. We need to collaborate. We're going to have to design better. We're going to have to design simpler, and we're certainly going to have to do it more thoroughly. Because the easiest way to get through Gateway 3 is going to be to plan it better, to design it better. Okay? To get your manufacturers involved, get your specialist contractors involved, get whoever's taking that design liability, get them involved before it goes to plan, so that then when you construct what was designed without needing to change it. That way Gateway 3 is easy. Okay? Record, keep the records, and maintain it in place. That way you can continue to occupy the building will be safe for all its occupants. It's a really simple recipe. He says, sounds simple, it's going to be really, really hard, it's going to be a real change. But we're going to have to do it to deliver all this going forwards. We'll finish with a quick piece of, again with Dame Judith. I don't know if any of you see, HSE is our new building safety regulator. They produce, of their building safety program, there is a monthly e-bulletin that comes out. This quote's taken from, I think, from the January or February one that comes out and lands in your inbox, tells you what's going on within HSE. If you're responsible, if you're involved in building safety in any way, shape or form, I heartily recommend you to sign up to that piece. It will tell you whatsoever. But you can see, you know, basically, this is it's the standard. Don't wait for regulation. Do the right thing now. Speech. So I'll say that. Don't wait for regulation. Do the right thing now. All right. And there we have it. Passive fire protection. We've been lobbying for improved standards for a long time. As you can see from that, the evidence of this picture of a door, big fire on one side, nothing on the other side. PFP, if it's properly installed and properly maintained, it only works. We're going to get future legislation changes. Will go some way to improving standards, but a lot of this is going to be left up to us to sort out. A lot of it will be left up, but if we do the right thing, not only will it's also going to make everybody's lives easier to design and build and construct and occupy safer buildings. He says, at this point I would normally click and it would say any questions, but I haven't put an any questions slide on the end of this. So I'll just say thank you very much for listening. Are there any questions? There's a microphone coming, sir.
What happens to LABC now that HSE is taking over?
So local authority building control remains. but the building control the standards for building control, both LABC and AIs, is now all under the control of HSE. So there is a registration process and there's lots of work involved. So I gave a similar version of this, and the previous speaker to me was Martin Taylor from LABC, no relation. And he was saying that, they're still very much involved in this. One of the issues there is, you won't be able to necessarily to appoint your own AI. There will be there's role for both LABC and AIs in it going forward under the auspices of HSE. Okay. Any other questions? I've stunned them into. Oh, hang on, gentleman there.
So I think in terms of monitoring the design management of Gateway 2 and into the construction phase, in terms of major and minor changes, are there going to be particularly defined terms, and what would those definitions be, or what are we expecting them to be?
I would expect there is going to be some definition of that, because the government's consulted on having that two-set tiered system, and it can't be that any change has to stop and go back to HSE, because if it does, we'll never get anything built, will we? So they are talking about having that two-tier system. And for practice, but they're going to have to put that definition in, and I think that is one of the things that's slowing down the delivery of. That's one of the key decision points in the secondary ledge.
And will those be consult before you do it versus do it and then advise?
Yes. So major is stop, tell. Let them think about it for a while, because the HSE will have a response time that they've got to give. Although there is, interestingly, no response from HSE is not a green light. Unfortunately. So there is going to be that major ones you have to discuss before you do. Minor ones, now I don't know whether can't remember whether it's do and tell or do and tell later, but you will have to, okay. Well, in that case, folks, thanks very much for attending. Have the rest of a wonderful show. And if you're interested in anything that we've said or want further discussions, there is a stand a few that way where you can find ASFP, and we've also got our wonderful, on the back wall, our interactive trailer with some VR headsets where you can look at fire stop. I don't know, don't ask me, I haven't had a look at it, but there is something there you can go and have a look at. All right, thanks very much.